So I will read the foreword. Often the hearts of men and women are stirred, as likewise they are soothed in their sorrows, more by example than by words. And therefore, because I too have known some consolation from speech, had with one who was a witness thereof, am I now minded to write of the sufferings which have sprang out of my misfortunes, for the eyes of one who, though absent, is of himself ever a consoler. This I do so that, in comparing your sorrows with mine, you may discover that yours are in truth not, or at the most, but of small account, and so you shall come to bear them more easily. Chapter 1. Of the birthplace of Pierre Abelard and of his parents. Know then that I came from a certain town which was built on the way to Lesser Brittany, distant some 8 miles, I think, eastward from the city of Nantes, and in its own tongue called Palais. Such is the nature of that country, or it may be of them who dwell there, for in truth they are quick in fancy, that my mind bent itself easily to the study of letters. Yet more, I had a father who had won some smattering of letters before he had girded on the soldier's belt. And so it came about that long afterwards his love thereof was so strong that he saw to it that each of his son of his should be taught in letters even earlier than in the management of arms. Thus indeed did it come to pass. And because I was his firstborn, and for that reason the more dear to him, he sought with double diligence to have me wisely taught. For my part, the more I went forward in the study of letters, and ever more easily, the greater became the ardor of my devotion to them. And until in truth I was so enthralled by my passion for learning that, gladly leaving to my brothers the pomp of glory in arms, the right of heritage, and all the honors that should have been mine as the eldest born, I fled utterly to the court of Mars, that I might win learning in the bosom of Minerva. And since I found the armory of logical reasoning more to my liking than the other forms of philosophy, I exchanged all other weapons for these, and to the prizes of victory in war I preferred the battles of minds in disputation. Thenceforth, journeying through many provinces, and debating as I went, going whithersoever I heard that the study of my chosen art most flourished, I became such as one as the Peripatetics. Chapter 2. Chapter 2. Of the persecutions he had from his master William of Champeaux, of his adventures at Melun, at Corbeil, and at Paris, of his withdrawal from the city of the Parcinians to Melun, and his return to Mont Saint Genevieve, of his journey to his old home. Humid. I came at length to Paris, where above all in those days the art of dialectics was most flourishing. And there did I meet William of Champeaux, my teacher, a man of most distinguished in his science, both by his renown and by his true merit. With him I remained for some time, at first indeed well liked of him, but later I brought him great grief, because I undertook to refute certain of his opinions, not infrequently attacking him in disputation. And now and then in these debates I was adjudged victor. Now this, to those among my fellow students who were ranked foremost, seemed all the more insufferable because of my youth and the brief duration of my studies. Out of this sprang the beginning of my misfortunes, which have followed me even to the present day. The more widely my fame was spread abroad, the more bitter was the envy that was kindled against me. It was given out that I, presuming on my gifts far beyond the warranty of my youth, was aspiring despite my tender years to the leadership of a school. Nay, more, that I was making read the very place in which I would undertake the task, the place being none other than the castle of Milan, at that time a royal seat. My teacher himself had some foreknowledge of this, and tried to remove my school as far as possible from his own. Working in secret, he sought in every way he could, before I left his following, to bring to naught the school I had planned and the place I had chosen for it. Since, however, in that very place he had many rivals, and some of them men of influence among the great ones of the land, relying on their aid, I won the fulfillment of my wish. The support of many was secured for me by reason of his own unconcealed envy. From this small inception of my school, my fame in the art of dialectics began to spread abroad, so that little by little the renown, not alone of those who had been my fellow students, but of our very teacher himself, grew dim and was like to die out altogether. Thus it came about that, still more confident in myself, I moved my school as soon as I well might to the castle of Corbeil, which is hard by the city of Paris, for there I knew there would be given more frequent chance for my assaults in our battle of disputation. No long time thereafter I was smitten with a grievous illness brought upon me by my immoderate zeal for study. This illness forced me to turn homeward to my native province, and thus for some years I was as if cut off from France. And yet, for that very reason, I was sought out all the more eagerly by those whose hearts were troubled by the lore of dialectics. But after a few years had passed, I was whole again from my sickness. I learned that my teacher, that same William, Archdeacon of Paris, had changed his former garb and joined an order of the regular clergy. This he had done, or so men had said, in order that he might be deemed more deeply religious, and so might be elevated to loftier rank in the prelacy, a thing which, in truth, very soon came to pass, for he was made Bishop of Chalons. Nevertheless, the garb he had donned by reason of his conversion did not to keep him away either from the city of Paris or from his wonted study of philosophy. And in the very monastery wherein he had shut himself up for the sake of religion, he straightway set to teaching again, after the same fashion as before. To him did I return, for I was eager to learn more of rhetoric from his lips. And in the course of our many arguments on various matters, I compelled him by the most potent reasonings first to alter his former opinion on the subject of the universals, and finally to abandon it altogether. Now, the basis of this old concept of his regarding the reality of universal ideas was that the same quality formed the essence alike of the abstract whole and of the individuals which were its parts. In other words, that there could be no essential differences among these individuals, all being alike, save for such a variety as might grow out of the many accidents of existence. Sounds a lot like. Now, the basis of this old concept of his regarding the reality of universal ideas was that the same quality formed the essence alike of the abstract whole, and of the individuals which were its parts. In other words, that there could be no essential differences among these individuals, all being alike, save for such variety as might grow out of the many accidents of existence. Thereafter, however, he corrected this opinion, no longer maintaining that the same quality was the essence of all things, but that, rather, it manifested itself in them through diverse ways. This problem of universals is ever the most vexed one among logicians, to such a degree, indeed, that even the Porphyry, writing in his Isagoge regarding universals, dared not attempt a final pronouncement thereon, saying rather, "This is the deepest of all problems of its kind." Sorry, it's so heavy here. Okay, this is the deepest problems of all kind. Wherefore it followed that when William had first revised and then finally abandoned altogether his views on this one subject, his lecturing sank into such a state of negligent reasoning that it could scarce be called lecturing on the science of dialectics at all. It was as if all his science had been bound up in this one question of the nature of universals. Thus it came about that my teaching won such strength and authority that even those who before had clung most vehemently to my former master and most bitterly attacked my doctrines, now flocked to my school. The very man who had succeeded to my master's chair in the Paris school offered me his post, in order that he might put himself under my tutelage along with all the rest, and this in the very place whereof his master and mine reigned. His master and mine had reigned. His master and mine. And when, in so short a time, my master saw me directing the study of dialectics there, it is not easy to find words to tell with what envy he was consumed, or with what pain he was tormented. He could not long, in truth, bear the anguish of what he felt to be his wrongs, and shrewdly attacked me that he might drive me forth. And because there was naught in my conduct whereby he could come at me openly, he tried to steal away the school by launching the vilest calumnies against him who had yielded his post to me, and by putting in his place a certain rival of mine. So then I returned to Milan and set up my school there as before, and the more openly his envy pursued me, the greater was the authority it conferred upon me. Even so held the poet. Jealousy aims at the peaks, the wind storms the loftiest summits. Ovid, Remedy for Love, Book 1, Chapter 316. Not long thereafter, when William became aware of the fact that almost all his students were holding grave doubts as to his religion, and were whispering earnestly amongst themselves about his conversion, deeming that he had by no means abandoned this world, he withdrew himself and his brotherhood, together with his students, to a certain estate far distant from the city. Forthwith I returned from Milan to Paris, hoping for peace from him in the future. But since, as I have said, he had caused my place to be occupied by a rival of mine, I pitched the camp, as it were, of my school outside the city on Mont Saint Genevieve. Thus I was as one laying siege to him who had taken possession of my post. No sooner had my master heard of this than he brazenly returned post haste to the city, bringing back with him such students as he could, and reinstating his brotherhood in their former monastery, much as if he would free his soldiery, whom he had deserted, from my blockade. In truth, though, if it was his purpose to bring them succor, he did not but hurt them. Before that time, my rival had indeed had a certain number of students, one of one sort and another, chiefly by reason of his lectures on Priscian, in which he was considered of great authority. After our master had returned, however, he lost nearly all of these followers, and thus was compelled to give up the direction of the school. Not long thereafter, apparently despairing further of worldly fame, he was converted to the monastic life. Following the return of our master to the city, the combats and disputation which my scholars waged both with himself and with his pupils, the success which fortune gave to us, and above all to me, in these wars you have long since learned of through your own experience. The boast of Ajax, though I speak it more temperately, I am still bold enough to make. If fain you would learn how victory crowned the battle by him, was I never vanquished. This quote is read differently in a different book. It's Ovid Metamorphosis, 1389. But even were I to be silent, the fact proclaims itself. and its outcome reveals the truth regarding it. While these things were happening, it became needful for me again to repair to my old home, by reason of my dear mother, Lucia. For after the conversion of my father, Ber- Ber- Berengarius, Berengarius, to the monastic life, she so ordered her affairs as to do likewise. When all this had been completed, I returned to France, above all in order that I might study theology, since now my oft-mentioned teacher, William, was active in the episcopate of Chalons. In this held of learning, Anselm of Leon, who was his teacher therein, had for long years enjoyed the greatest renown. Chapter 3. Of how he came to Leon to seek Anselm as teacher. Sought out therefore this this same venerable man this same venerable man, whose fame, in truth, was more the result of long established custom than of the potency of his own talent or intellect. If anyone came to him impelled by doubt on any subject, he went away more doubtful still. He was wonderful, indeed, in the eyes of those who only listened to him, but those who asked him questions, perforce held him as naught. He had a miraculous flock of words, but they were contemptible in meaning, and quite void of reason. When he kindled a fire, he filled his house with smoke, and illuminated it not at all. He was a tree which seemed noble to those who gazed upon his leaves from afar, but to those who came near and examined it more closely was revealed its barrenness. When therefore I had come to this tree, that I might pluck the fruit thereof, I discovered that it was indeed the fig tree which our Lord cursed. Matthew 21:19, or Mark 11:13, or that ancient oak to which Lucan likened Pompey, saying, "He stands, the shade of a name once mighty, like to the towering oak in the midst of the fruitful field." Lucan Pharsalia 4:135. It was not long thereafter I made this discovery, and stretched myself lazily in the shade of that same tree. I went to his lectures less and less often, a thing which some among his eminent followers took sorely to heart, because they interpreted it as a mark of contempt for so illustrious a teacher. Thenceforth, they secretly sought to influence him against me, and by their vile insinuations made me hated of him. It chanced, moreover, that one day, after the exposition of certain texts, we scholars were jesting amongst ourselves, and one of them, seeking to draw me out, asked me what I thought of the lectures on the books of Scripture. I, who had as yet studied only the sciences, replied that following such lectures seemed to me most useful in so far as the salvation of the soul was concerned, but that it appeared quite extraordinary to me that educated persons should not be able to understand the sacred books simply by studying them themselves. together with the glosses thereon, and without the aid of any teacher. Most of those who were present mocked at me and asked whether I myself could do as I had said, or whether I would dare to undertake it. I answered that if they wished, I was ready to try it. Forthwith they cried out and jeered me all the more. Well and good, said they. We agreed to the test. Pick out and give us an exposition of some doubtful passage in the Scriptures, so that we can put this boast of yours to the proof. And they all chose that most obscure prophecy of Ezekiel. I accepted the challenge and invited them to attend a lecture on the very next day, whereupon they undertook to give me good advice, saying that I should by no means make undue haste in so important a matter, but that I ought to devote a much longer space to working out my exposition and offsetting my inexperience by diligent toil. To this I replied indignantly that it was my wont to win success, not by routine, but my ability. I added that I would abandon the test altogether unless they would agree not to puff off their attendance at my lecture. In truth, at this first lecture of mine, only a few were present, for it seemed quite absurd to all of them that I, hitherto so inexperienced in discussing the Scriptures, should attempt the thing so hastily. However, this lecture gave such satisfaction to all those who had heard it that they spread its praises abroad with notable enthusiasm, and thus compelled me to continue my interpretations of the sacred text. When word of this was bruited about, those who had stayed away from my first lecture came eagerly, some to the second and more to the third, and all of them were eager to write down the glosses which I had begun on the first day, so as to have them from the very beginning. Chapter 4. I wonder if my... Okay. Chapter 4. On the persecution he had from his teacher Anselm. Now this venerable man of whom I had spoken was acutely smitten with envy, and straightway incited, as I have already mentioned, by the insinuations of sundry persons, began to persecute me for my lecturing on the Scriptures no less bitterly than my former master William had done for my work in philosophy. At that time there were in his old man's school 2 who were considered far to excel all the others, Alberic of Rheims and Lodolf the Lombard. The better opinion these 2 held of themselves, the more they were incensed against me, chiefly at their suggestion, as it afterwards transpired. Yonder venerable the pretext had alleged was that if by chance in the course of this work I should write anything containing blunders, as was likely enough in view of my lack of training, the thing might be imputed to him. When this came to the ears of his scholars, they were filled with indignation at so undisguised a manifestation of spite, the like of which had never been directed against anyone before. The more obvious this rancor became, the more it redounded to my honor, and his persecution did not save to make me more famous. Chapter 5. Of how he returned to Paris and finished the glosses which he had begun at Leon. And so, after a few days, I returned to Paris, and there for several years I peacefully directed the school which formerly had been destined for me, nay, even offered to me, but from which I had been driven out. At the very offset of my work there, I set about completing the glosses on Ezekiel, which I had begun at Leon. These proved so satisfactory to all who read them that they came to believe me no less adept These proved so satisfactory to all who read them that they came to believe me no less adept in lecturing on theology than I had proved myself to be in the field of philosophy. Thus my school was notably increased in size by reason of my lectures on subjects of both these kinds, and the amount of financial profits as well as glory which it brought me cannot be concealed from you. For the matter was widely talked of, but prosperity always puffs up the foolish, and worldly comfort enervates the soul, rendering it an easy prey to carnal temptations. Thus I, who by this time had come to regard myself as the only philosopher remaining in the whole world, had ceased to fear any further disturbance of my peace, began to loosen the rein on my desires, although hitherto I had always lived in the utmost continence. And the greater progress I made in my lecturing on philosophy or theology, the more I departed alike from the practice of the philosophers and the spirit of the divines in the uncleanliness of my life. For it is well known, methinks, that philosophers, and still more those who have devoted their lives to arousing the love of sacred study, had been strong above all else in the beauty of chastity. Thus did it come to pass that while I was utterly absorbed in pride and sensuality, divine grace, the cure for both diseases, was forced upon me, even though I, forsooth, would fain have shunned it. First was I punished for my sensuality, then for my pride. My sensuality, I lost those things whereby I practiced it. For my pride, engendered in me by my knowledge of letters, and it is even as the apostle said, knowledge puffeth itself up. 1 Corinthians. I knew the humiliation of seeing burned the very books in which I most gloried. And now it is my desire that you should know the stories of these two happenings, understanding them more truly from learning the very facts than from hearing what is spoken of them, and in the order in which they came about. because I ever held in abhorrence the foulness of prostitutes, because I diligently kept myself from all excesses, and from association with the women of noble birth who had attended the school, because I knew so little of the common talk of the ordinary people. Perverse and subtly flattering chance gave birth to an occasion for casting me lightly down from the heights of my own exaltation. I'm going to read that again. I knew the humiliation of seeing burned the very books in which I most gloried. And now it is my desire that you should know the stories of these two happenings, understanding them more truly from learning the very facts than from hearing what is spoken of them, and in the order in which they came about. I had ever held in abhorrence the foulness of prostitutes, because I diligently kept myself from all excesses, and from association with the women of noble birth who attended the school, because I knew so little of the common talk of ordinary people. Perverse and subtlety flattering chance gave birth to an occasion for me, casting me lightly down from the heights of my own exaltation. Nay, in such case, not even divine goodness could redeem one who, have been so proud, was brought to such shame, were it not for the blessed gift of grace. Chapter 6 of how, brought low by his love for Heloise, he was wounded in body and soul. Now there dwelt in the same city of Paris a certain young girl named Heloise, the niece of a canon who was called Fulbert. Her uncle's love for her was equaled only by his desire that she should have the best education which he could possibly procure for her. Of no mean beauty, she stood out above all by reason of her abundant knowledge of letters. Now this virtue is rare among women. For that very reason, it doubly graced the maiden, and made her most worthy of renown in the entire kingdom. It was this young girl whom I, after carefully considering all those qualities which are wont to attract lovers, determined to unite myself in the bounds of love. And indeed, the thing seemed to me very easily to be done. So distinguished was my name, and I possessed such advantages of youth and comeliness, that no matter what woman I might favor with my love, I dreaded rejection of none. Then, too, I believed that I could win the maiden's consent all the more easily by reason of her knowledge of letters and her zeal therefor. So even if it were parted, we might yet be together in thought with the aid of written messages. Perchance, too, we might be able to write more boldly than we could speak, and thus at all times could we live in joyous intimacy. Okay. Thus, other, oh my gosh, thus, utterly aflame with my passion for this maiden, I sought to discover whereby I might have daily a familiar speech with her, thereby the more easily to win her consent. For this purpose, I persuaded the girl's uncle, with the aid of some of his friends, to take me into his household, for he dwelt hard by my school, in return for the payment of a small sum. My pretext for this was that the care of my own household was a serious handicap to my studies, and likewise burdened me with an expense far greater than I could afford. Now he was a man keen in avarice, and likewise he was more desirous for his niece that her study of letters should ever go forward. So for these two reasons, I easily won the consent to the fulfillment of my wish, for he was fairly agape for my money, and at the same time believed that his niece would vastly benefit by my learning. More even than this, by his own earnest entreaties, he fell in with my desires beyond anything I had dared to hope, opening the way for my love, for he entrusted her wholly to my guidance, begging me to give her instructions whenever so I might be free from the duties of my school, no matter whether by day or by night, and to punish her sternly if I should find her negligent of her tasks. In all this, the man's simplicity was nothing short of astounding to me. I should not have been more smitten with wonder if he had entrusted a tender lamb to the care of a ravenous wolf. When he had thus given her to my charge, not alone to be taught, but even to be disciplined, what had he done save to give free scope to my desires, and to offer me every opportunity, even if I had not sought it, to bend her to my will with threats and blows if I failed to do so with caresses? There were, however, two things which particularly served to allay any false suspicion: his own love for his niece, and my former reputation for countenance. Why should I say more? We were united first in the dwelling that sheltered our love, and then in the hearts that burned with it. Under the pretext of study, we spent our hours in the happiness of love, and learning held out to us the secret opportunities that our passion craved. Our speech was more of love than of the book, which lay open before us. Our kisses far outnumbered our reasoned words. Our hands sought less the book than each other's bosoms. Love drew our eyes together far more than the lessons drew to the pages of our text. In order that there might be no suspicion, there were indeed sometimes blows, but love gave them, not anger. They were the marks not of wrath, but of a tenderness surpassing the most fragrant balm in sweetness. What followed? No degree in love's progress was left untried by our passion, and if love itself could imagine any wonder as yet unknown, we discovered it. And in our inexperience of such delights, made us all the more ardent in our pursuit of them, so that our thirst for one another was still unquenched. In measure as this passionate rapture absorbed me more and more, I devoted ever less time to philosophy and to the work of the school. Indeed, it became loathsome to me to go to the school or to linger there. The labor, moreover, was very burdensome, since my nights were vigils of love and my days of study. My lecturing became utterly careless and lukewarm. I did nothing because of inspiration, but everything merely as a matter of habit. I had become nothing more than a reciter of my former discoveries, and though I still wrote poems, they dealt with love, not with the secrets of philosophy. Of these songs, you yourself well know how some have become widely known and have been sung in many lands, chiefly, methinks, by those who delighted in the things of this world. As for the sorrow, the groans, the lamentations of my students when they perceived the preoccupation, nay, rather the chaos of my mind, it is hard even to imagine them. A thing so manifest could deceive only a few, no one methinks, save him whose shame it chiefly bespoke, the girl's uncle, Fulbert. The truth was often enough hinted to him, and by many persons, but he could not believe it, partly, as I have said, by reason of his boundless love for his niece, and partly because of the well-known countenance of my previous life. Indeed, we do not easily suspect shame in those whom we most cherish, nor can there be the blot of false suspicion on devoted love. Of this, St. Jerome, in his epistle to Sabinianus, epistle 48, says, "We are wont to be the last to know the evils of our own households, and to be ignorant of the sins of our children and our wives, though our neighbors sing them aloud." No matter how slow a manner may be in disclosing itself, it is sure to come forth at last, nor is it easy to hide from one that is known to all. So after the lapse of several months did it happen to us. Oh, how great was the uncle's grief when he learned the truth, and how bitter was the sorrow of the lovers when we were forced to part. With what shame was I overwhelmed, with what contrition smitten because of the blow which had fallen on her I loved. And what a tempest of misery burst over her by reason of my disgrace. Each grieved most, not for himself, but for the other. Each sought to allay, not his own sufferings, but those of the ones he loved. The very sundering of our bodies served but to link our souls close together. The plenitude of the love which was denied us inflamed us more than ever. Once the first wildness of shame had passed, it left us more shameless than before. And as shame died within us, the cause of it seemed to us ever more desirable. And so it chanced with us as, in the stories that the poets tell, it once happened with Mars and Venus when they were caught together. It was not long after that Heloise found that she was pregnant, and of this she wrote to me in the utmost exultation, at the same time asking me to consider what best be done. Accordingly, on a night when her uncle was absent, we carried out the plan we had determined on, and I stole her secretly away from her uncle's house, sending her without delay to my own country. She remained there with my sister until she gave birth to a son, who she named Astrolabe. Meanwhile, her uncle, after his return, was almost mad with grief Only one who had seen him could rightly guess the burning agony of his sorrow and the bitterness of his shame. What steps to take against me, or what snares to set for me, he did not know. If he should kill me, or do me some bodily hurt, he feared greatly lest his dear loved niece should be made to suffer for it amongst my kinsfolk. He had no power to seize me and imprison me somewhere against my will, though I make no doubt he would have done so quickly enough had he been able to or dared. For I had taken measures to guard against any such attempt. At length, however, in pity for his boundless grief, and bitterly blaming myself for the suffering which my love had brought upon him through the baseness of the deception I had practiced, I went to him to entreat his forgiveness, promising to make my amends that he himself might decree. I pointed out that what had happened could not seem incredible to anyone who had ever felt the power of love, or who had remembered how, from the very beginning of the human race, women had cast down even the most noble men to utter ruin. And in order to make amends even beyond his extremest hope, I offered to marry her whom I had seduced, provided only the thing could be kept secret, so that I might suffer no loss of reputation thereby. To this he gladly assented, pledging his own faith and that of his kindred, and sealing with kisses the pact which I had sought of him, and all this that he might more easily betray me. I'm going to stop there. Page 27. All right. And stream. And